All right, the time is now 6:30, and I will call to order the Monday, October 23rd, 2027 Cedarburg School Board Budget Hearing. This is a public hearing of the Cedarburg School Board and is a public hearing. Prior notices have been placed in the district and additional copies were forwarded to the News Graphic and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, this evening we have a presentation from Mr. Irwin on our proposed budget. So why don't you take it away?
All right. I think Mr. Creer said I have 3 hours for the presentation, so
Well, I think didn't we bump it to 4?
yeah, just make sure we got everything.
Yeah, we want to make sure we get it all. Yep.
Try to bring that in a little bit under that. So as we look at the 23-24 budget, just want to recap where we ended for 22-23. The audit's still in the process of being completed. It's mostly done. Just the final statements are being completed, and there'll be a presentation to the board in January regarding the final audit. But in regards to 22-23, from a financial standpoint, we ended up with a surplus of just under $300,000. That's primarily be driven by a technology grant we received. So technology grant that was around $300,000. There's some expenses associated with that. Without that grant, our surplus would have been around $100,000 or so. So we ended up in a good position for the 22-23 fiscal year. Result of that usually ends up being just our expenditures usually coming in lower than projected. So, but as a result, we're able to add those funds back to our fund balance for the general fund. At the end of 22-23, it's just under $10 million, so $9.9 million, which represents 26% of our 22-23 expenditures for that year. At this point, we always like to remind the community that our fund balance is not a representation of money in the bank. It's our assets, basically, minus any liabilities that we have. So over the course of the year, that number fluctuates up and down, and especially during November through April, we're cash short in a lot of cases since our revenues come in big chunks from the tax levy and state aid. So between November and April, we actually cash flow borrow to cover that shortfall during that time period. But in general, being at 26% for our fund balance is a good position to be. Board policy sets a minimum of 15%. That's really the bare minimum. If our fund balance was less than it was now, we'd be borrowing more for cash flow, so we incur more interest costs from that. It also exposes us a little bit more to possible emergency expenses and trying to figure out what that looks like. So we're in a good position in terms of if anything comes up, we're able to take care of it, but also minimize the amount we have to cash flow borrow from year to year. As we look at 23-24, here are some of the highlights that we're looking at for this upcoming fiscal year, or current fiscal year. So we're presenting a balanced budget for 23-24. This is primarily being driven by the state biennial budget. From the state budget, we received a $325 per pupil increase on our revenue limit, but also the low revenue limit ceiling was increased to $11,000. So those two items together increased our revenue to a point where we're able to balance for this year. Without those changes, we would have had a budget deficit close to $2 million for this year. So we would have to figure out how to balance that through possible budget cuts and reductions. But fortunately, the state budget made us whole, and so we're able to balance for this year. This will be the last year of our use of federal ESSER grant dollars. And so those came in 3 rounds from the federal government in response to the COVID pandemic. At this point, we have just over $250,000 left with those funds that have to be spent by September 30th next year. Those funds are pretty much being used to supplant local costs to help us balance our budget. So eligible costs that are within that ESSER grant proposal. So we'll use those funds up this year and then be good to go moving forward. In terms of state aid, that increased slightly from last year. So it's right around $14.5 million. And so the increase doesn't result in any new usable revenue for the district because that's part of the formula that's for the revenue limit. And so revenue limit, our cap, that's the amount of money maximum amount of money we can collect from tax levy and state aid. So as we get more aid, that reduces our reliance on the tax levy. So those two work in conjunction. So, but the main point there is the increase doesn't necessarily directly result in more revenue for the district. But it's good to see an increase because it reduces our burden for the tax levy. 23-24 will also be the 5th year for our teacher comp plan that the board has approved. So this is an ongoing effort by the school board to keep our teacher compensation and salaries competitive with the area and across the state. These increases are above and beyond negotiations, and so these are adding supplemental wages, increases, recurring wages to teachers across the district to help keep us competitive. In terms of compensation, this budget has a 4% increase built into the fiscal year for all staff. The negotiations is still ongoing with the teachers union, but increases have been implemented for all their staff that are not part of negotiations. And so trying to keep up with that inflation number that continues to be pretty high as we look through this year. There's also a deposit in Fund 46 plan for this year of $500,000, so reinstating that and making sure we're putting funds aside for capital projects we have planned for in the future. We've gone through that plan in the past with the board in terms of those long-term needs, and $500,000 is not quite where we want it to be in terms of some of our needs, but it is helping us keep pace and keep afloat with some of those items that are coming up for renewal and replacement. This year, we are replacing have replaced part of the West Lawn Elementary roof, which was just under $1 million, and there's been some other technology equipment upgrades that have been included with that Fund 46 budget as well. Overall, as a result of the budget changes from the state and then also inflationary increases, revenues increasing by just over 1%, expenditures by just over 2%, and that's in relation to actual costs for 22-23. And then overall, when we look at all funds, not just a general fund, total expenditures increased by just over 3%. That's really being driven by those Fund 46 expenditures for the roof and technology upgrades. Any questions on the summary before we move forward? All right. So as I mentioned, the revenue limit is a revenue cap that all districts in Wisconsin work within. That is the maximum amount of money we can collect as a district and use to offset our expenditures within our budget. For 23-24, as a result of the state budget, our revenue limit's increasing by over $2 million, and so that's a substantial increase from what we've seen in the past. And that's really helping us, like I said previously, to help us balance our budget. Main driving forces from that would be the per pupil increase and the low revenue ceiling increase as well. So a total increase per pupil that we received for this year is just over $830 per member within our system. However, when we look at that compared to local area districts, we still have to put that in comparison with what other resources other districts may have. So when we look at the per member amount that each district has within the revenue limit, that's in 22-23. You can see kind of where we're at for starting before the state budget, which was just over 10,169. And so as a result of the $325 per pupil and the low revenue ceiling going to 11,000, that's how we got to the $831 per pupil. The only district in the area that was a little bit less than us was West Bend, and so they got a little bit more per pupil to get them to that 11,000. And then you can see that some other districts had an amount that's a little bit less, but more than the $325 per pupil to get them also to 11,000. For districts that were already over 11,000 or pretty close to it, they just got the $325 per pupil increase. So they're kind of building on top of their base that they already have. So it's important to have that perspective when we look at our budget, because we're working with just that $11,000 per pupil, where other districts may be working at 11,500, 12,000 plus. Even more than that. So very important when we look at competitive compensation, resources that we have within the district. We have to do more with less pretty much with what we got. And I think we do a pretty good job of doing that. Just a quick breakdown of the general fund revenue by source. So it's our main fund and kind of the main sources that we have for revenue. For us and for all districts in the state, it's going to be from state sources with state aid and the local tax levy. So that's going to be split. 95% is going to be mostly from that source of revenue. How that's split between state and local revenue will depend on the district. Typically, more property-rich districts will have more from the tax levy, and districts that have lower property values in relation to the state will have more from the state aid and equalization aid. So we get more from the tax levy in relation to the general aid, but there's also other factors that make that up too in terms of enrollment, spending habits, stuff like that can fluctuate one of those, one or the other. We look at expenditures. We're a service industry, so a lot of our expenditures are going to come from salary and benefits, over 71% when we look at just the general fund. However, when we add in transfers for Fund 27 and Fund 46, Fund 46 obviously is for capital projects and equipment, but the transfer we do for Fund 27, that tends to be around the $3.5 million range. That's pretty much all going to Fund 27 salary and benefits and staff. So you can include that pretty much within the 71% we have for salary and benefits in general funds. So we're close to 80% in terms of how much of our budget is spent on just staffing, whether it be compensation or benefits. So that's the main driver for our expenditures within the budget. However, beyond that, we also have purchase services, so that'll include transportation, leases that we have, maintenance services, open enrollment out, tuition costs, stuff like that would be included in purchase services. And then that last piece, that all other, would be general supplies, liability insurance, stuff like that. That are obviously an important part of our budget, but not as big of a portion as the staffing that we include. And just a quick breakdown on Fund 46 and how we use that. It was established by the Cedarburg School District in 2017, and so at that point we had 5 years that we had to kind of sit on the money before we can start using funds out of that. So obviously that timeline came up last year, and so we've been putting money into that account over the years to help build up that fund, and now we're going through the process of evaluating and prioritizing different projects that we have within that list, and that comes to the board for approval to move forward with any projects that we want to have that come out of that Fund 46 account. With the projects that we have planned and board approved for this year with the West Lawn Roof project and the technology upgrades, and then the deposit we have of $500,000 into Fund 46 this year, we'll end up with a fund balance of just over $1.6 million at the end of this year that we'll have in that Fund 46 account for future costs as needed. The other reason why we use Fund 46 is that when we use the costs that come out of there, they don't hit our shared costs as part of our equalization aid for state aid. And that's important because we are more of a property-rich district, which means the more we spend, the less aid we get, and that puts more of a burden on our tax levy. So we're very cognizant of how much we're spending, our spending habits, and this Fund 46 fund helps us kind of manage that, so we don't have a large project that would hit us in 1 year and kind of throw off our shared costs. That would lead to kind of an influx and the reliance on the tax levy 1 year and then reverse the following year. So it's part of that approach as well in forecasts. Any questions on any of these items? All right. We look at membership. We had a slight increase this year. So when we look at from a financial standpoint, business managers and school finance will always refer to it as membership, which is a little bit different in enrollment or head count. Our head count for this year, which is students and seats, that went up by 30 compared to last year. So we're at just around 3,100 students for this year. When we look at membership, the reason those two are different is because membership basically takes our head count minus open enrollment in students plus open enrollment out students. So really trying to get to the number of resident students we have in the district. And then there's a calculation based on how long students are attending for the day. So 4K students for membership as an FTE, they count as 0.6 rather than a 1.0. So that's part of the calculation we do to calculate membership. Membership's using the revenue limit, and it's using state aid calculations, so that's why it's important for school finance. Membership, another way to look at it is just kind of resident students, whether they attend here or not. But overall, like I said, it's increased by 13 FTE compared to last year, and so that'll help us from a financial standpoint. The revenue limit takes a 3-year average from the previous 3 years to the most current 3 years, and kind of see where that compares. And so that ends up being less of a kind of difference as a result of the increase here for the 13 FTE.
And what was the head count again?
Head count increased by 30.
And do you have
so I think
total?
they're right at 3,100.
Okay.
But overall enrollment's pretty stable for us. There's been slight upticks before the pandemic, had a drop last year, and it's coming back up this year. So a good spot to be in for a school district. I know other districts have declining enrollments, and there's a lot of financial challenges for that. And then there's districts that have exploding enrollments, which in the short term is great for finances, but in the long term you have to manage for capacity and kind of where you're going to put those students. So I think we found kind of a good sweet spot for that. We do 2 counts each year. There's one September that we just completed. That one's the most important one because that's for revenue limit and for state aid. And then the one we do in January, that's for state aid. So 2 times we count officially each year. We look at local property values. This is a breakdown of total valuation across the district. We have 6 municipalities that make up the Cedarburg School District, and we have portions of each of those municipalities. 90% of our property values are from the city of Cedarburg and the town of Cedarburg, but we do have portions of the town of Grafton, village of Grafton, city of Mequon, and town of Jackson. So altogether, they make up our total property value for the district, and we always use the TID-out value, which excludes any kind of tax incremental districts, which would be excluded from taxes for however long that plan's set up. So these numbers we look at very closely because they won't necessarily impact how much revenue we collect as a district, but they will impact the tax levy and the impact on the local property homeowner. Overall, property values have been increasing over the last 10 years, going from $2.6 billion in 2014 to just under $3.8 billion in 2023. Last couple of years especially, this year we're increasing property values by 11.5%. Last year they increased by 14%. So valuations are going up. There's also new construction mixed in there. So again, property values, these numbers we look at, they don't impact how much revenue we collect, but they do have an impact on the tax levy, and so that's why we keep a close eye on them in terms of what that looks like and also how much aid we could possibly receive in the following year. So we look at local property values. Like I said, 90% of our property values come from the city and town of Cedarburg. But the question is, where is that property growth coming from? Because that could also have an impact on the local homeowner and how much they pay. So there's 2 ways, obviously, property values can increase. It could be from new valuations, from that increasing, or from brand new construction. So using data from the Department of Revenue, we can take a look in terms of where the property values were for city and town of Cedarburg, and then how that's broken down between just valuations going up or actually new construction, which is new property owners, new tax base, which can help offset some of the tax burden from other homeowners in the community. So we look at that for this year for the city and town. For the city, 77% is coming from valuation increases, 23% from new construction, and then town, it's a 91 to 9% split between those two numbers. So that brings us to our tax rate. So the tax rate is going to be a valuation pretty much of the total tax bill divided by the property values in the community to get kind of an average impact per homeowner. It's not a perfect system because obviously it's an average, so it could fluctuate based on individual circumstances between municipalities or just in the neighborhood. But it gives us a sense of kind of where we are in relation to not only the state, but also in previous years for the district. So for this year, we're proposing a $6.50 tax levy rate, which would be the same rate as it was last year. This has really been driven by property value growth and also the increase in the revenue limit. So those 2 numbers are kind of keeping the tax levy rate flat for this year. The tax levy rate, when it was set last year at $6.50, was the lowest rate has been set in over 40 years for the district. So we're at a very good spot in terms of the tax levy rate for the community. Last year, the statewide average for the tax levy rate or mill rate was $7.68, so we're keeping well below that, which is good. And then over the last couple of years, that tax levy rate has been decreasing pretty substantially. So in 2020, it's $8.79, so it's decreased by 26% just in a short amount of time. And that is even more impressive when you consider that all these, the tax levy still includes that $59.8 million referendum from 2018 and those debt payments that are ongoing. Any questions on that? All right. So when we look at, when I mentioned a mill rate or tax levy rate and that $6.50, what does that mean for the property owner? So we're take a look at a tax bill and kind of what that can equate to when you look at your tax bill and what you could try to do to help equate that to the line item for the school district. So it's a basic tax bill. You have assessed value, fair market value, school levy tax credits are on the top right, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the middle part, obviously, is broken down by different taxing jurisdictions. So school, number 1015, that'd be us for this year. So when we look at breaking it down and what that $6.50 comes from and how it's calculated within the tax bill, where we want to start is at the fair market value, total estimated fair market value. So take that number and we take the $6.50. We have to convert it to kind of the decimal that we use within the revenue limit, which is just kind of moving a couple decimal points over. Take that, the school levy rate, and then minus the school levy tax credit, which is part of a formula that's distributed for all homeowners. That gets us to individual school levy. So pretty straightforward formula to look at that, and as long as you're using the right numbers, you should be able to get there. Like I said, the mill rate's going to be an average for the community, so that $6.50 can kind of range a little bit from tax bill to tax bill. So in most cases, when I was running scenarios on different tax bills, it ended up being just kind of either a rounding issue or just a couple dollars off here or there. So it wasn't a huge difference, but it kind of gave a ballpark of where that might land. The reason to look at your tax bill in relation to the tax levy rates and kind of how it changes from year to year would be determine how it's calculated and what factors could also have an impact in terms of how much you owe the school district from the tax levy. So if our tax levy is approved and for this year at $6.50, obviously the same rate as last year. On the surface, you'd assume you just pay the same as you did last year. However, factors that would change that would be any kind of changes in total estimated fair market value. And so that's when we look at the total property value growth and why that's important, because if it's valuation going up, most people are going to see their values go up, and that could impact how much they pay. So it's still $6.50, but your home is $50,000 more than it was valued in last year, then you'd probably be paying more compared to 22, 23.
And just to clarify it for everyone, the values are not something that we set. That's set by the county and the
Right.
city assessor. Okay.
Yep, that's a good point. The other factor would be the school levy tax credit, and I'll mention that a little bit. But basically, it's a pool of money that's distributed among all property owners in the state, and that's a credit that everyone will get that will reduce the burden from the tax levy for the district. So when we look at this tax bill specifically, you can see the 2021 and 22 net packs, and you can see that the school line item actually slightly increased from the year prior. And if you remember from the previous slides that we had, our tax levy rate actually decreased, going from $7.43 to $6.50. So the main reason for that increase would be their fair market value went up. And so even though the tax levy rate's going down, their home is valued at more than it was in the previous year. So just important parts to keep in mind. So when we say, the tax levy rate's the same as it was last year, that may or may not lead to a flat tax impact for the upcoming year.
Do you know overall how the school levy tax credit, has that changed from last year? I mean.
Yep. So we look at the school levy tax credit. Over the last 5+ years, it's been the total allocation or funding for that's been around $940 million. And so there's a formula that the state uses based on statewide tax average and the municipality tax average and 3 years of that data to distribute it. And basically it gets to a point of that $940 million being distributed among all property owners in the state. Whereas important is if that number is increased, that total pool of money is going to increase for everyone. And so for this year, what was included in the budget was a 27% increase in that total pool of money. And so assuming all else being equal, most people should see a bump in their school levy tax credit by 20 to 27% based on how that final formula is calculated. That school levy tax credit is nothing we do on our end. It goes straight to the municipalities and they distribute it as they do the calculations. So we're not too involved in that, but we do know the total pool of money is going up quite substantially from last year to this year. So that should help offset any kind of fair market value increases people may see to help kind of balance that out a little bit. In 24-25, it's going to go up a little bit more above 23-24 by another 7%. So that should help as well. And like I said, look at the tax bill, it's going to be that number, that letter C in the top right. It's going to be a number that's going to show up on the tax bill to help offset that. Okay, and as we look as kind of a summary of the budget hearing, a typo there, it's 23-24 budget hearing recap, but Fund balance, like I said, just under $10 million for the end of 22-23, so 26% of our general fund expenses for 22-23. We're proposing a balanced budget for 23-24. Most of those funding increases are coming from the state budget for 23-25. Tax levy rate of $6.50 is being proposed, same rate, which is the same rate as last year, and again, the lowest rate that's been for the district in the last 40 plus years. Membership increased by 13 FTE for 23-24, so our total FTE membership is 2964. Like I said, that's different than headcount enrollments. That's going to be around 3,100, but that number is the number we use for finances, so that's kind of what we highlighted here. And then Fund 46, just maintaining that deposit of $500,000 and then projecting a balance of just over $1.6 million at the end of this fiscal year after the deposit and the expenses we have planned. So that was a brief overview of the 23-24 budget. There's also a 23-24 budget hearing report. It's about 35 pages that includes a lot more detail about this year's budget and specific breakdowns in terms of different ways to look at how different areas break down. So feel free to look through that if you're looking for more detail on the 23-24 budget. But overall, that concludes my presentation for the budget for this year. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments.
Ben, thank you. Thanks for all your work, your team, and the Personnel Finance Committee. I know this is something that you folks have been working on for the whole year, and here we are. I know it's. I think that if people are interested in the details, most of those the details are in the 35-page report, but also in the minutes and the presentations of all those meetings that you've had.
Yep.
So the report in itself is a summary of a lot of the work that you folks have done. So appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So Ben, you've already been thanked, so I won't add much more to that. But I do just have, when I'm looking through each of these line items, and we're looking at the budget that was approved last year and the timeline for negotiations and when the budget was approved, and it including the approved percentage after that negotiations committee meeting. I'm trying to word this okay, since those my only area of kind of iffiness is that we haven't had that meeting yet. So you have that 4%, but on the surface, and perhaps even in actuality, it's less than the CPI from last year, right? So if
For
someone
this
were
year.
if someone were just looking at those line items. So that's the one area where, if you don't mind delving a little bit more into why it's right now in the proposed 4% versus, let's not even talk about 8% because that's outside of the realm of where things are at. But even last year, where it's 4.7, this year we have it right now proposed at 4.
Yep, good questions. Even though we're presenting the budget now and vote on it Wednesday, the budget process is an ongoing one over the course of the year. So a couple items as they come up, we'll go to the board for approval, larger items. 2 outstanding items that are still a work in progress that we have accounted for in the budget but could still change based on other factors that we're working through. So one, there will be health insurance renewal, so we're currently working through that. So we'll have more information on that at Wednesday's board meeting, kind of scenarios or options that we can present to the board. And the other one, as Connie mentioned, would be the negotiations. We haven't brought a proposal or a resolution to the board yet regarding the negotiations because we still haven't gone through that process yet. So right now that 4% is just a placeholder. The 4%, then the reason we landed on that 4% is basically because that's what we could work with in our budget for this year. CPI for 23-24 as part of negotiations was set at 8%, which is a state number that we get told to kind of work within. And so that was kind of our starting point for discussions with that, but then also being fiscally responsible and managing it within the budget. 4% is where we landed in terms of this is where we can land and still balance a budget for this upcoming year. Committing to a number higher than 4%, 6, 7, 8%, could be done at the board's discretion, but then the flip side of that would be we'd create a budget deficit within our budget that we'd have to account for by budget cuts within our system or whatever it may be. So those are discussions we've had at the Personnel and Finance Committee meeting leading up to this whole process, going through those different scenarios. And, if we have the funds available, I think we'd like to go higher than the 4%. But like I said, we're just trying to work within our budget allotment and what we have available for that. And we believe that 4% still makes us pretty competitive compensation-wise within the area and with other districts. So,
Kind of following up on that, have you done any work on projecting numbers if we were to increase above that 4%? Say, for example, if for some reason with healthcare costs, employers are going to have to pay more. Obviously, we don't want them to have to pay more and then not see, an increase in that. So
Sure.
Will there be projections that can be looked at in time for that negotiations meeting so we can kind of see where things would fall if we do need to increase?
yep, yeah, we can pull specific numbers on those and do calculations on like down to the penny. Rough numbers, basically every percent increase is about $250,000 more to our budget, and so that's kind of what we have to account for each kind of percent that we go up. So going to the full 8%, and we included this as kind of like a parking lot item for our budget. To get us to full 8% would be another $1 million, and so like I said, it's something, if we have the funds available, we'd have more discussion on that and kind of explore those options. But adding $1 million to a balanced budget, we'd have to figure out some way to kind of balance that out, and possibly budget cuts or whatnot would be the only solution. So.
All right, if there's no further comment here, I'm wondering if there are if there's anyone in the public who has any questions. Looks like there's nobody. All right. I guess that concludes it. Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn if there's no further discussion, questions, etc.
I will make the motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion on that motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.